Good evening, and welcome to RestartED's virtual town hall, the seventh in a series of panel discussions taking place each Thursday throughout the summer. RestartED is a grassroots movement that is bringing together education stakeholders across the country to crowdsource solutions for safely reopening and operating schools in a COVID and post-COVID world. Your contributions are critical, so open the chat room at the bottom of your screen and actively contribute your questions, thoughts, and solutions. And please spread the word of RestartED to your peers in your district and at others. The more minds we have working towards solutions, the better chance we have of succeeding together. The focus of tonight's panel discussion is facilities considerations for school reopening. And we have a distinguished group of school architects and facilities directors with us this evening. So with no further delay, I'd like to introduce our panel. Degman graduated Bloomsburg University with a BS degree and completed her MBA at Lehigh University. She started working in the software development field and later became the technology director for the Long Branch Public Schools. She transitioned to the facilities director while the district built over $110 million of new schools. Within the last 2 years, she has oversight in restoring the crown jewel of the district, the 100-year-old high school, to its former glory while upgrading to a state-of-the-art facility. Within the past year, Ann managed a $10 million energy savings improvement plan and has taken an even larger role in the district operations as assistant business administrator. Adam Nasser is Director of Facilities for Matawan Aberdeen Regional School District and a member of the Board of Education in Wall Township, New Jersey. He previously sat as Vice President on the Executive Board of the New Jersey chapter of the International Facility Management Association. He holds an MBA from the University of Illinois, as well as multiple certifications in sustainable operations and facilities management from IFMA, the U.S. Green Building Council, and the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors in London. His experience includes work in residential, commercial, nonprofit, and government real estate, property management, and construction. We're very fortunate this evening to have two principals in the architecture firm of Freytag, Wies, Hopkins, Duthie with us this evening. For more than 100 years, FVHD has specialized in the design of public facilities with a focus on public pre-K through 12 schools. Both of our guests have over 30 years of experience in the design of public schools and have overseen hundreds of projects for hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. Ted Hopkins has experience in all phases of school construction projects with a particular focus and expertise in the early schematic and design development phase of the project. Ted was an early leader in the U.S. Green Building Council and has been a lead accredited professional for almost 20 years. Ted has also been affiliated with NJASBO, providing assistance and guidance to its members, and has made many presentations over various topics for the organization. He is a graduate of Temple University. George Duthie has experience in all phases of school construction projects with particular expertise in the construction phase and the planning and development of complex phased projects. George has written several articles for School Leader magazine dealing with capital project planning, school security, and other topics. He has presented at NJASBO and NJSBA conference workshops on many pertinent topics. He is a graduate of the New Jersey Institute of Technology. It is now my pleasure to turn things over to our moderator for this evening's discussion, Dr. Scott Rocco, Superintendent, Hamilton Township School District.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you to all of our panelists. I'm honored to guest moderate tonight this important conversation. So let's get started with the first question, which I'm going to ask each of our panelists to talk about tonight. So question number one, every district is unique and every school in every district is unique. What are some creative concepts or ideas you've had to develop for reentry plans on the uniqueness of your district or your school within your district? And I'm going to start with Ann.
Well, Scott, as we were talking a little bit before this started, this has been such a moving target that we really had to examine deeply every individual school. We have preschools, we have elementaries, and we were really looking very closely at the entry into the schools, because we were getting so many different guidelines from different groups that said, oh, let's use one entry for the school. So as we filter those out, I think our biggest attribute is collecting as much information from the principals and the staff that are working in the building to be able to address each specific unique need in the buildings. Because even though I may have built the buildings, I don't know every minute of the day, and I would never presume to know how a building operates. So really drawing out that information from the principals to develop their unique needs, because many of the things we're doing, I think a lot of the schools are looking at with the hand sanitizer, with the scannings, where the bus coming in, how we process children when they come in. But you really need to look at the details that the building staff can really provide you to tell you, really how you have to make all the adjustments of all the items that you're bringing to the table to really fit their needs.
Thank you. Adam, how about you?
That was a great answer by Ann. I know a lot of us facility managers are wondering, how we can help align the plan to the needs of the buildings. And, great examples. Some of the things that we've been doing are a little bit more behind the scenes right now because the plans are so fluid. Trying to hit a moving target, it's extremely difficult. So getting into the details of what we do actually have control over is essential, because I'm noticing more and more that organizations are locking up because they're looking at everything in the aggregate and they're having trouble breaking it down into what they need to make decisions on and what are those what if rabbit holes that everybody is going down. So really coming up with a clear decision-making process, to build off of Ann's comment and making sure it aligns with everybody that's in the organization, I think has been really essential for us to get moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Ted and George, before we started here, we talked a little bit about the fact that you're getting a lot of calls and you're getting a lot of questions and you've got to answer those questions. So I'll start with Ted, but what are some of those questions that are coming in that are unique in a perspective of the facility that you're dealing with?
I think it comes down to the uniqueness of each school and each classroom. And as George and I deal with each district, we didn't want to necessarily get into a standard, if you will, of every classroom's going to fit every building. And as Ann stated, there's a uniqueness. So whether you have a 600 square foot classroom, Scott, or a 650 square foot classroom, or a 900 square foot classroom, the layouts of each of those classrooms are going to be so unique and different that you'll be able to put more kids than you think, possibly. And we've started to do that, Scott, with districts. We started to lay out a classroom that is typical. And I hate to use that word, but in each school, there may be typical classrooms of 800 square feet. So you can lay out specifically how many kids you think you can safely put in the school. I think from our perspective, that has been valuable to our clients as to not just take a number and divide it by 113. We all know what that number is, right? It's not just using that number, but really looking at it, because not everybody needs 113 square feet. And what I mean by that is if a child is in a desk and a chair against the back wall, they certainly don't need 113 square feet. But you also have to allocate some movement of the area in the front of the classroom for the teacher to move. So there has to be some flexibility in how that movement happens. So from that perspective, that's what I can say is unique, is getting to each building, getting to each classroom, and really giving it a good layout so you can get an idea and not just using that 113 number.
Yeah, I want to come back to that on classroom layout in a minute here, but I want to just finish up this first question with George. Anything unique that you've been asked by superintendents or principals related to facilities and buildings and classrooms?
Just today, I was talking to a client who said, we're putting tents outside of our buildings. We're putting tents, where the kids can queue up so, we can screen them before they come in. And the fire marshal gave him a very hard time, which was predictable to me. It's a temporary structure. There are building codes that are guidelines for temporary structures. If you're too close to the building, there's a fire retardancy that has to be considered. That structure has to be anchored down in the event that there's a wind load, on it. So that's one of the things. And I thought Ted was going to bring up, we've been getting a lot of questions about HVAC and air quality. And what do you do about that? Everything from, a typical classroom with a unit ventilator, the teachers want to turn those off because they're blowing air into the room. We have mandates, obviously. I mean, there's actually two things going on. We have older HVAC equipment like the unit ventilators, right? That, many classrooms have. And that's your ventilation. So you're not turning that off, right? Can you open windows instead? Well, that creates problems too. We have kids with asthma and, susceptibilities. That's not always the best solution. Then you have the newer equipment, right? Which is energy code compliant, like energy recovery ventilators that are bringing in and are designed to bring in minimum amount of outside air and are not easily changed to a different setting to comply with the energy code. That's why it was done. So it's not as if we can just, turn a switch or, flip a button and bring in more air into these rooms. That's really not feasible. And what about window air conditioners? A lot of people have been, have in their classrooms, that's their cooling. They use window air conditioners. And, when that's on, is that blowing air across the room in such a way as to spread, particles, or aerosolize something? And, no one really knows, but you can't go into school in September without having cooling. If that room is a window air conditioner, you're not turning that off.
Right.
So we're getting questions like that. A lot of things I got one comment about fire marshal questioning arrows on the floor. Like, what is that going to happen? What's going to happen when a kid is an emergency? Are you saying he can only go that way? Are you going to train them in a fire drill to turn and go the other way? So that's because that's the closest exit, even though that's not the way they would normally travel in the building in the course of the day, down a one-way hallway. Not all schools are configured to work with one-way corridors either. That's not always a solution. So it comes down to the uniqueness of every building, both in terms of its physical layout, its space, and its equipment, and many other criteria as well. We talked about nurses' stations, screening areas. What happens when a person comes in? What districts that build security vestibules? How do you handle the sudden influx of people who are going to be queued up at the door?
Right.
Be screened if you're letting visitors in at all, which maybe
Right.
you're not. Some schools aren't.
Right. So let's stay with the classroom for a minute because George, you hit some good points there. But I'm going to start with Adam about the structure of the classroom. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion about the amount of space that's allowed per child for social distancing. But talk to us a little bit about how you're structuring your classrooms to social distance.
Well, I mean, first off, we have to look at that 113 square feet, which seems to be the magical number. And, for those that aren't familiar, and Ted he went into it pretty well. He drop a pin in the middle of a circle, and that circle, the area is 113 square feet. So what we're looking at, we can go two different directions here. The first is, do we look at barriers? Do we look at alignment of desks pointed in a certain direction? Do you take advantage of your walls? And some of them have costs that we're going to have to account for as we go down the line. But the other side of the coin is, if you can't social distance, what are you going to do? So the Department of Ed has put in guidelines where, if you wear a mask, you can pretty much have regular school day. And, that's kind of their out within the plans that they've issued and guidance that they've issued to all the districts. So, I mean, it really is an essential question, and Ann touched on it before, with aligning with your principals and understanding what their plans are for their classrooms, how many kids you're going to have in the classroom, what type of activities you're going to have in the classroom. I mean, there's just so many different questions that it can almost go in any different direction right now. There's really no good answer.
Right. And are you talking with the principals and the superintendent about not only the social distancing in the classroom, but also how it can be instructionally functional?
Yes. So I've been reading a lot more on Twitter about this than I ever did from across the country, because I really think it brings to light how people really feel, teachers. I have some teachers in the family, but you can hear from 30 teachers online and 30 principals and 30 superintendents, and collecting that data, I think, is just valuable on any given day. So somebody online had posted a picture of their classroom and said, oh, look at this, we can get 15, 18, desks in it. And I looked at it and I said, well, okay, but I wonder how many we can get in one of our rooms. So then when we started to look at it, we did every building, because oddly enough, our middle school, we could get almost 16, 18 desks in a room. But at the high school, we were down to 11, simply because of the orientation of the room and also trying to social distance from the teacher space in front. So it really, and then I just sent out the pictures to the principals and said, hey, just want to give you something to think about the next time we come together, because this is going to vary greatly from building to building. So, and they were all like, wow, because they finally got to visualize what a room would look like instead of doing, and I love my BA, but he was like, oh, it's simple math. We could put this many kids in a room. I said, it's not quite that simple. You really have to do a layout. And when you push the desks up to the sides, how close do they get? And so it was just eye-opening to see that this middle school stood out as a very different enigma than every other building. And every other building classroom really came down to about 12. So it really opened a whole nother discussion on what those rooms would look like when they start to, come together.
Yeah.
And that's just regular ed.
And you have to visualize it, right? You have to see it in action of what it looks like on a piece of paper is one thing, but then when you walk into that classroom and see how it's structured, it changes your whole perspective. Ted and George, I spent probably a half an hour, 45 minutes today on the phone with our architect, my business administrator, and we talked about airflow. We talked about air movement in classrooms, which has been a really big topic. Can you explain to those who are participating tonight about airflow in classrooms, about how that works with univents and HVAC units? I think people need to understand how that operates in a classroom. And then, and aside to that, and I'll open it up to everybody after that, is this issue of what kind of venting happens in a bathroom, because not all of our bathrooms have windows, right? So let's start with just airflow, the concept of airflow and how that works with univents and HVAC units. So Ted or George, whoever wants to jump in on that one to start.
I can defer to Ted on that, but either one. But I know it's germane to something Ted's been working on, so that's why I was deferring to the client.
Listen, I think part of the 104-page memo that came out was really structured towards this almost entirely, Scott, and anybody listening. From my perspective and getting approach from clients, I think, and I'll try to summarize it very basically. There's three different types of rooms, and of course there's an overlap of the first couple. But one is the ability to provide any space and provide the appropriate amount of outside air, and of course that's going to vary depending where the damper is and so forth. But that's a flexible number. You can actually bring in more or less. And the idea is to bring in more. Everybody thinks, as we are being told, as the puzzle is being put together, that more outside air is going to be better than less. But it also framed it in a way that, well, if you don't have that outside air being brought in through the unit, you can also do it through opening windows. And there's almost a you don't want to do both at the same time, but you can. Depending on the temperature of the day. If it's 75 degrees, you can open the windows and have your air conditioner going. And you're not going to be as crazily losing heat as if you would if it was 100 degrees outside. So keeping that in context, whether it's outside air, whether your ability to open windows with operable windows, or a third category was it doesn't fall into the first two categories. Those are the spaces, as I read that 104-page governor's executive order, that he was focusing on specifically. I read that thing and I said, that's what he's looking for. Which spaces do not fall into one of those two categories? So from that perspective, as we look at spaces around the buildings, Classrooms are almost all going to do that because most of them have windows, Scott. But the big rooms such as gyms and cafeterias and so forth, they most likely do too, but it depends on the age of the equipment. So an assessment should be made on those spaces that tell us whether they can or cannot. Some of them clearly may not. And I think that's what we need to focus on is at least bringing that to light. I mean, you know, light is the best disinfectant, and bringing that up. And there may be inner spaces that don't have access to windows or don't have that outside air. From that perspective, I think that gives you an idea of which rooms are best being able to hold these kids or not. And staff. I don't want to miss staff. Staff is very important as well. I don't want to miss them as well. So that's how I'm focusing our ideas and our intent with clients, and giving them at least an idea that if somebody walked up to Scott Rocco and said, Scott, which spaces have the appropriate outside air, can open up windows, and which can't? And you know that. You have that ability to do that quickly. These are the spaces that I have. These are the spaces that I don't. I think that would be a very effective tool for somebody in your position.
Thank you.
And the other thing, I mean, we have to consider the condition of the equipment. You know, I mean,
Sure.
we have unit ventilators. Yeah, it's on, and Adam and Ann, they'll both tell you, you know, it's blowing air. It's not outside air, because 5 years ago the damper stopped working on the outside air. It's stuck
Absolutely.
closed, and you don't even know it's stuck closed. And so you have a unit ventilator, yeah, but it's not bringing any outside air in at all. You know, and unit ventilators, I mean, they're fine for what they are, and that's what was used way back then, and even today still sometimes. They move a large quantity of air in a relatively small area, you know, and so that air has to come out and has to be dissipated within the room. So in that process of being dissipated, you know, it's at a fairly high velocity, right, when it comes into the room. So, you know, you have to check the condition of the equipment, and you have to understand that you know, that is and again, you can't turn it off. Now, sometimes you can turn, there's 2 speeds on there. You can turn it to low speed or something, but you have that unit ventilator in many cases. If you have a window air conditioner, as I said before, you know, and that's what's cooling your room, that's something else to think about. Kid, even in front of a unit ventilator, a kid sneezes. What happens? That air, is that are those particles moved across the room because you got a high volume of air coming out of that unit ventilator or out of that window air conditioner in a relatively small space, and that air is being dissipated within the room. So as far as large areas go, I would say, you know, many schools, again, same thing. I agree with Ted. You know, it's condition of equipment. Just because it's running, it doesn't mean it's bringing in the quantity of outside air that it should bring in. You know.
So just a quick question to the architects.
Sure.
How important do you guys feel it is to get Hepa filters for all of the equipment?
I wanted to address that. Yeah. Well,
Sure.
So HEPA filters, you know, obviously, you know, they do have the ability to filter certain viral particles. I would be hesitant. I don't know that we can prove that a HEPA filter, you know, filters out COVID-19. I don't know if that's been tested, but let's say it's a high level of filtration, but it also is a dense filter. So, and I think Adam and everyone would agree that you can't put a HEPA filter on any piece of equipment. The fan doesn't have the capacity to move the air through that filter. And you won't have any ventilation. The fan will just spin and nothing will happen, right? And so HEPA filters, yes. We're seeing another thing called, you know, and you guys have probably heard of them, hydroxyl generators, you know, where they bring the air and they treat the air in a closed like UV container and they spit it back out. So it looks like a little portable air blower, really. We're getting a lot of inquiries about that. BioShine and companies like that do these understate contract, another technology that's out there. But I don't know that the effectiveness on those viruses have been proven yet. And I would be hesitant to recommend that without having the science behind it.
Yeah, and I appreciate the question. It's out there a lot. I hear it all the time, and I'm glad you're bringing it to light. I agree. It's just too dense of a filter to really work effectively in a small area that we're talking about. It's probably and it really hasn't been proven. So would it hurt from a viral perspective? Probably not, but from a usability standpoint, it might be actually worse.
And they're costly. They're very costly, and their lifespan is not as long as a regular filter. So you're already it's tough to keep up now with changing filters. I mean, imagine if you had to deal with the cost and the time frames of changing out a HEPA filter as well. You know.
So let me chime in on this because
Sure.
this is right up my alley when it comes to indoor air quality. A HEPA filter, we can't. Ted and George are right. We can't put them in the commercial equipment that we have because the airflow that needs to flow through that filter it's not it's too restrictive. But what can we do? The equipment that we have, they rate filters based on what is called a Merv rating. And a Merv rating is basically the amount of layers in a filter and the amount of pleats in a filter. In other words, the more surface area, the better, because there's more air that's able to get through. You have to be careful with this too, in checking with your manufacturer specifications. Most the newer commercial equipment, you can get up to MERV 13 on, which is basically the lead standard, which is the U.S. Green Building Council standard for their equipment. But in certain univentilators, and I know Ted is going to be happy to hear this because he and I worked on substantial HVAC project. Certain upright univentilators by certain companies can get up to a MERV 16, which is the step below HEPA. It's as high and as good as you're going to get in a non-lab environment. When it comes to UV lights, that's another question I've been getting a lot. There's two different applications for UV light. There's an application where you kind of roll in this R2D2 with a bunch of light bulbs sticking out of it. I'm sure we've all gotten the advertisements on that. And you turn it on and it performs a surface disinfection. And then to George's example that he just brought up, there is UV lights that you can insert into ductwork, and it kills the virus as it flows through the air ducts. That's a concern. It's important to understand what the actual concern is, and that's and I want to mention this real quick: the aerosolization of the virus. In other words, it's not necessarily the mist that comes out of somebody's mouth if they sneeze. It's as the droplets fall, the moisture evaporates and the virus becomes suspended in the air. And that's what the fear is, and that's what we're trying to filter out. The UV lights can kill that. In a piece of commercial equipment, because of the amount of air that's flowing through, you're looking at somewhere in the range of 70 cents per CFM. I was talking to somebody about this today, just saying, what would it be to price that out? Well, for us, it would be a couple $1 million, so it's not really feasible, at least at this point, on this short of a time frame. But my final thing I'm going to say on HVAC is, especially if you have newer equipment around, call up your controls company and have a conversation on what the setup of what the programming is on those controls. A lot of modern equipment has 300 or 400 different things you can control in it, different dampers you can open, different settings that you can make. And there's ways to fool your equipment to make it open the outdoor air dampers more. So there's two ways we figure out what the outdoor air is going to be. There's a standard per ASHRAE, which is the code setting organization that sets, okay, say you're going to have 15% open air damper, and that's what it's going to be, air coming in. Usually an engineer will calculate, whatever the size of the opening is, if there's a fan, it's technical. The other way, and this is what George is referring to with these new univents, is most of them operate on the amount of CO2 in the room. And if you don't have a fully packed room like we're used to having, and the way we design is to have a densely populated room, you're not going to open up that air damper because the CO2 setting or the CO2 set point that never gets hit. So you can lower them and fool it into opening up a little more. And that's why I say, make friends with your controls guy, because it can be a fairly tedious task to go through and reset everything. If you have a guy in house that can do it, it's great. It's a good thing either way to send a guy out to get training for that kind of thing. That's a whole nother conversation. But, HVAC is probably one of the things that you have the most control over, even though it may be the most foreign to everybody to understand.
Absolutely. I agree with what Adam just said. As far as an ATC setting, this is going to be a new normal like you've never seen before. It's not going to be normal, and it's going to be fluctuating and opening up dampers faster and more normal to get those outside air in, and the CO2 levels are even going to be better when you do that.
But,
But
defeating the energy efficiency of all those systems
no
and
question.
increasing the
No
cooling
question.
and heating loads in all your buildings.
No question. Yep.
There is a trade-off, definitely.
Which contradicts. It's just like opening a window. Why would you open a window? We spent comment here. We've been spending 20 some years figuring out how to make schools more secure, and now we're opening windows and we're going to say, what, and we've been trying to protect the kids. What about windows that have security film on them? You open them, you defeat the purpose. I mean, many schools went around, invested all this money in security film, and some even put security glazing. Now you can open a window and make the population vulnerable again.
I'd much rather, I think Adam would agree, I'd much rather open the damper to get closer to 100% outside air through the unit than to open the windows at the same time.
I'd rather
you can help yourself so much better.
Yeah, and there's allergens. I don't see opening a window. Maybe if you're on a second or third floor, but.
The more we talk about this, the more complex it gets, right? You got to keep thinking and talking about the impact that it has on every child in every classroom. And, that's the point of every school is unique. So we talk about airflow in a classroom and in a building. Let's talk a little bit about cleaning in high touch areas. So, and how are you handling high touch areas like water fountains, lockers? What are you doing in your district about that?
Well, when this all started, that's my energy. I'm trying to stay still so I'm not annoying while you guys are talking.
You're doing great, Ann. You're doing great.
With the lockers, we have to figure that out, right? Because they're right up against each other. And right now, what we found at the end of the pandemic, when the pandemic started, was the high school kids don't use the lockers.
Right.
So we're going to be okay there. The middle school kids really use the lockers. So we're going to have to, we're going to have to look at that because you've got the cubbies for the little kids and all that is open. So we haven't quite figured, exactly how we're handling that. As far as the high touch areas, we did get some ionic sprayers, that we started using last year during the flu season before, the COVID came on, because we had 1 or 2 schools that had a higher rate of flu. So we really pushed the, extra sanitizing of the touch, the touch spaces, the back of the chairs, the desks, the doorknobs. And then we were using these sprayers at night to hit all of those pieces again. Then we did start to see the numbers in those classrooms or in those buildings for the flu actually go down. I mean, I can't say scientifically it was tied to that exactly, because you have family and community spread, just like we're seeing it now. But we're instituting that. And then we're starting to talk about, when we open up, taking a second person off of our second shift and putting them more on a swing shift. So most of our custodians work 6 to 2 and then 3 to 11, but we're looking at maybe one person in the bigger buildings to come over and start working like a 10 to 6 shift. And basically that's what they're going to be doing in the common areas. The teachers have already started to talk about in our surveys that they would like to take over doing some disinfecting in their classrooms. If the children are going to pass in and out, in and out of the rooms, which again, that whole plan hasn't come together, but the teachers want supplies to be able to disinfect in between every room. So, there's different ways to tackle that. We have a very strong sustainable program here, which again, we're balancing between staying green, which we had to give up some of that when we went to hand sanitizers that are 60, 70% alcohol, but trying not to do wipes in every classroom and between every classroom, and when we got 450 classrooms a day, no matter how many children you have in there, we're going to be using practically every room. So we're knocking around ideas. We have hospital grade cleaning that we're going to get spray bottles, and it's the same cleaning solution the custodians use. And we're talking about microfiber rags, making them available, washing and sanitizing every evening. Again, trying to balance being a little bit of green and not giving all of our beliefs out to the pandemic and say, oh, the heck with it. But we're also very sensitive about teachers' concerns. So whereas we have this product that we know, we believe in and we trust, some of those teachers are going to want to bring in their own products. So, we're looking at balancing that. We're not going to just close the door and say, like we used to, sorry, right to know, can't do it. Now we're going to start opening the door and say, well, let's talk about what you want to bring in. Let's talk about that. Let's get the SDS sheets. Let's start documenting it, and trying to be very sensitive those concerns.
Yeah. Adam, can you talk to us a little bit about some of the cleaning protocols you're going to put in place, and are you going to allow water fountain use?
So I keep seeing the water fountain question knocked around the chat, and it's a great question. They do make bottle filling stations and water fountains. I know LK is one company that makes them that are great. Not only do they fill bottles, but within the water fountains, they have water filters that filter out lead. So you could potentially kill two birds with one stone if you're having those issues. When it comes to cleaning practices, we modeled our original cleaning practices after best practices in LEED and other sustainable ways. So as Anna said, we're having to backtrack in a few different ways. We are lucky in that about 2 years ago, we started using an electronically actuated water system. The company Tenant made it. It was an Orbio system that creates hypochlorous acid, which is probably the greenest disinfectant you can actually use. A disinfectant in and of itself is not sustainable because it's a biocide. It's basically a pesticide. It kills everything as long as it sits on a surface for a certain amount of time. But in the scale of things, the hypochlorous acid is the best, one of the best things you can use. The systems are expensive. The great part is you get it there. It's a capital cost, so you can capitalize it over a few years. On the flip side, though, it is costly to maintain. It's like having a kid. You got to babysit it because it's a very sensitive piece of equipment. But you don't have to worry about supply chain issues. You don't have to worry about there is SDS sheets, but it makes it a lot easier and takes a lot off our minds. The one thing that I've been seeing, and I wanted to bring it up in here, is the microbial coating subject. And I saw a comment in the chat a little while ago about things being suggested and things being important, but also things not being proven effective against COVID. And I think that's an important conversation that we all have to have in our minds, because there are a lot of new products that are coming out and existing products that are being marketed as effective against COVID. And bottom line is, and UV light is a great example. I know in Monmouth County, we got an email from our health department recently saying that in certain aspects, UV light has not actually been proven to be effective against COVID, even though it probably is. So, we have to weigh what we have proven science on and what is going to be a public relations type question. Especially, this is me as a board member speaking, it looks great to be able to say that in public, but is it really going to work? And is it an effective use of the limited capital that we have on hand, especially as this year goes by, because it's going to be a tough on every single front.
Yeah, so Adam, just as an example of that, I often talk about how every day when I open up my email in the morning, everybody is a COVID expert. So I probably have 100 emails from companies that buy this, buy that, this will kill the virus, you want this here. Everybody's become that. And I think your comment is important for us to understand, not only as superintendents and building principals, those in charge of facilities, but as parents, right? That you might be hearing things or seeing things in your inbox or on social media. They're not proven, and we have to go with things that we know will work, right? We can't just put things in to say, hey, we've got this, but then in the end, we don't really know if it's actually going to be effective or not. And as a superintendent, that bothers me. I would rather go with something that's a proven item or disinfectant or something else, so I know it's at least doing its job, versus go with something unique.
Let me build off that real quick, because this segues into a different area and something that we're doing different, and that is you can get an accreditation or a third-party certification on your cleaning programs. There are international organizations that set standards for the way we do things, especially with regards to cleaning, because we're stepping closer to almost a hospital standard as we up the disinfection. So it's important as you do this that you're doing it correctly, because when you're using disinfectants, you're not just killing COVID, you're killing everything else. And you're opening opportunities for other bugs that are either resistant to bacteria or more resistant to treat, period, to affect your kids. And when you're dealing with a highly sensitive population, it becomes a problem if you're going to be going around almost like a cruise ship. So I know the ISSA is probably who we're going to be teaming with. They offer a third-party certification. They offer, and this isn't an endorsement by any means, there's plenty of organizations out there. APA is another one. They work a lot in higher ed, but they're the ones that really set the international standards, and they can train your people either through videos. They can do a train the trainer program, so that you can train your people to make sure that you're using disinfectants correctly. A good example is in Europe, certain countries, disinfectants are almost treated as a pesticide. You have to be trained, you have to be licensed to use them in a commercial capacity. So it's important to realize that we're using chemicals in that building, and using more chemicals doesn't necessarily mean you're creating a safer environment.
So, and it's a good point for you to make to people so that they understand that. And then, for those people that run facilities, that there are organizations out there that can certify you and you better understand it, which then means you can explain it better to our community. So let's move on to something that's unique now in the document from the DOE. So, I want to start with George and Ted as architects about this concept of isolation rooms, right? So I want to talk about isolation rooms first and then the nurse's office. So George, from an architectural aspect, what kind of questions, what kind of work have you been involved in when it comes to creating these isolation rooms for students or staff that show symptoms?
Well, that's a great question. And obviously, in most school buildings, most are not, the nurses' suites, first of all, many times aren't even properly positioned within the building because it's an older building, and a nurse's suite isn't, ideally you want it near the front of the building, you want it near the main office, and you want it, to be accessible. So what we're doing is trying to find spaces, right, that are near the outside of the building for isolation, that are near the outside so a sick person can leave the building immediately, preferably with a bathroom. So, and sufficient space for more than one person. It's not just a cot room, it's a room for multiple people where they can, and they also have to be supervised. Somebody has to watch over them, especially sick children, right? You can't just leave them in there by themselves. So it stretches, that the school's healthcare, professionals, or professional, and some schools don't even have, a full-time nurse, right? So, so you have to find that space. So what space is that? Well, it's going to be a classroom, or maybe a small group room, or a space like that has to be kind of dedicated for isolation. Or, depending on whether you're having a gym anymore, and that's a whole nother thing, gym class, but, maybe it's your gym and it's a big triage area, and, you got the locker rooms right there. It's a challenge because every building, again, is different. And to be honest, in some buildings, even keeping a nurse where she's located now is problematic, the location within the building, right? So, now, so there is some thinking, like we have bathrooms, more recently designed nurses' suites took into account like sick kids, not in the terms of an isolation, but an area for the sick kids and an area for the, for the kids who have to get their routine medication or have a twisted ankle or something like that. But in many school buildings, again, it depends upon the layout, and it depends upon, the people in the building too, and what your ability is to be able to monitor them.
I think the only addition to that, because George handled that very well, I think is, most nurses' suites are slightly larger than closets, and over the years, George and I have had the ability to make them a much better space. And when we do that, we usually add something called an exam room, and hopefully that room in and of itself, I think, Scott, you're bringing that up, is maybe a good place to start. I agree that it could be something as simple as the principal's conference room, if it's near the front of the building, and an isolation room, and maybe give that space up for those kids that are very near the front of the building and can be easily escorted out of the building, as a parent or guardian comes to pick them up. I think that's kind of where we were starting. I mean, to make it a room that's dedicated, that's small, but that can handle, that on a quick basis. That would be where we think we're going.
So Ted, I have a quick question for you guys. Do you guys have any kind of formula for, per the size of the building, how many children we should try to prepare to accommodate in this isolation room?
Wow.
You see, that's what's scary to me. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if there's going to be another outbreak. You could have no sick kids. You probably have no sick kids, and it's not just kids. It's staff. What are you going to do with 6 staff members? They send them right home, I guess. I mean, it depends how sick they are, I suppose. But we don't know. What do you do if you have 2 kids? It's one thing. If you have 15 sick kids, is it going to happen one day? Who knows what's going to happen? That's one of the things about this COVID. It's not predictable.
So there's no guidelines yet for
No guidelines.
an idea.
Oh, no, we have no guidelines.
No, nothing at all.
Basically,
And
find
great
a room.
question.
No
Okay,
guidelines.
let's find a room near the front of the building, near an exit, where you can get the children out of the building instead of walking them through, and do the best you can.
With the bathroom.
And disinfect.
With the bathroom. With the symptoms that, COVID-19 exhibits in some people, you need a bathroom there.
And that
Oh,
sounds like a
of
great
course.
plan. That's a great plan, Ann. I like it. I like it.
Right.
You can get a bathroom, absolutely, include a bathroom, and
And a
that
bathroom,
I would
yeah.
agree.
So let's talk about the isolation room from the perspective of, George brings up the point that you could have multiple children that are, or adults, right? You could have multiple teachers or staff that might get ill in any given day, and you're not sure if it's COVID or not COVID. There's rumors going around, conversation happening about the room has to then stay empty for 24 hours. I mean, is that something that you've heard? Anybody's heard about that? Or is it just simply we're sanitizing it and we're moving on? So I see Adam and Ann shaking their heads. So Adam, what are you hearing about this?
What was recommended within the road back plan was leave it for 24 hours or longer if possible. I think if it was after 7 days, there's no additional disinfection that's needed. But so I'm assuming leave it open for 7 days or closed, nobody in there. And if you need it within day 2 and day 7, go in and disinfect it. So, I mean, at that point, what that disinfection looks like, whether it's a level 2, level 3, whether you not have to have a hazmat team roll in to clean it. I mean, it's not very clear. But, what we do know is, in isolation room, you're going to have to be prepared to possibly lose the use of it, especially if somebody comes in and they end up testing positive. To go back to the previous question, this was something that came up today in a meeting that I had earlier. One of the reasons that it's important to keep your isolation room and your nurse's office separate is if your nurse is delivering nebulizer treatments, they need a higher indoor air quality than normal. So you can't mix the two. They're even talking about, making accommodations to go outside to deliver those treatments if needed. So, I mean, there's so many conditions. Again, talk to your nurses because they are on a completely different level when it comes to the needs that they require in their rooms and treating their students. It's amazing.
A good question came up. What are the standards? So, we follow the department. This is a scary thing, I think, for some of us. It's the Department of Education. It's the old schoolhouse code. It hasn't been revamped in decades, I guess is the best way to say it. And we're following guidance that is very, very old, which only requires, in a nurse's suite, by the way, a treatment area, an exam room, and a toilet. That's basically it. That's all we're required to have in a nurse's suite, and a place for the nurse to work. But that's it. There's no guidance on isolation. There's no building code guidance for that. We're not dealing, for public schools. So we're on our own, as far as figuring that out goes.
And again, I go back to the best people to figure this out are your principals.
Yeah.
And that nurse, because I've had one nurse emailed me about 12 times. And I said, you really need to talk to the principal because I said, he's going to be giving up a room if you move to a larger room with a bathroom and a sink. I'm not saying it can't be handled, but the principals really know their buildings and know where, things are best suited. And I'm not sure the room needs to be cleared for 24 hours. I mean, a lot of cleaning can happen from one day to the next, and it's a single room. A lot of disinfecting can happen from one day to the next in one single room. I find it hard to believe with all the tools we have, we can't disinfect
Amen.
one room effectively, right?
Right.
With the staff we have and the science we have behind us from 3 o'clock one day to the 6 o'clock the next morning.
Right.
I'm pretty sure we can disinfect one room, and if not, we're all in trouble, right?
Well, I think that what we're talking about, and Ann, you touched on it, is that, how simple can you make the room? How limited amount of furniture that's in there so that it can be done very quickly and effectively. I think Adam would agree with that too.
Absolutely.
Be mindful of the surfaces because, that's another thing the science really hasn't, we're still not sure how long it lives on various different surfaces depending on the porosity and things like that. There's a lot of widespread information about that. And disinfecting one type of surface over another is much easier, right? So.
Well, I mean, one thing that's come up, at least in my conversations with some of the cleaning professionals, is to keep in mind that you can disinfect a hard surface. A soft surface like carpet or something that's porous, the best you can do is sanitize it. And there is a difference there between what is killed in the process and what is not. So if you have a lot of carpet, that needs to be a consideration in your cleaning program design as you go through it.
Yeah. So cots, mattresses, blankets, pillows, you got to think about that. That stuff has to be disinfected, especially if there's possibility that the people in the room, have COVID-19.
Have any of you been asked specifically for either the nurse's office or, say, the main office to create some type of structure, separation structure between the public and employees, or a space that is redesigned? Has any of that come up, either from, Ann and Adam from your own district, or Ted and George from the districts you work with?
Well, we've had a lot of discussion about the main office and providing plexiglass, a barrier, just like we're seeing when we go to the grocery store and the banks and even, just shopping. So we're looking at providing something, again, to make those people who meet and trying to keep visitors out of the building, but as many times as they have to meet a parent, to try to block that. I've tried to discourage as much construction, that try to jam in construction and permits and have the fire marshal come in and try to, and if one school wants it, then 3 more schools will want it. And it's tough to try to get that done in 6 weeks. So
Right.
I've tried to discourage permanent changes.
No time. Yeah, there's no time.
Right. I'm trying to discourage permanent changes, but moving people around and being very creative. Our principals, our staff, they're the most creative people on earth. We're bricks and mortar, so I think I want to, and I have been trying to encourage them, saying, give up a classroom. So what? Now what? What's the worst thing in the world? You give up a classroom.
Right.
Nurses move down the hallway. That's an improvement. Are we really losing out on one classroom? So, I think the principal has started to loosen up and say, yeah, we really need to think out of the box. And they're building experts. So we rely on them.
So I think that's been a theme that all of you have brought to the table tonight, which is, you have your expertise, and then the building principals, they know their buildings, right? And so working together, you're able to find the solutions to a lot of these problems that are out there. Again, the problems come up every day, a new problem every day, and we've got to work on new solutions. I could literally talk another hour, 2 hours, 3 hours with all of you. I mean, this has been fantastic. Lots of great information. Again, as we talked earlier, before we went on, I'll be thinking about this all night, all night long, about how I can implement this and think about this and talk with my facilities people on the things that I've learned tonight. So I want to thank you. We're going to close up in a moment, but I want to give each of you an opportunity for a final thought, something you want to leave our group with or something you want them to think about or consider. And I'll start with Adam.
Oh, I got a good one. And this is the reality of putting the plan together. The plan is due August 1st or August 8th, whatever, 30 days before your first day of school. That is 3 weeks too late to get the supplies that you actually need to get school started. Get your orders in now. Get your purchase orders out now because the supply chain is screwed up right now. If we do open up, we're going to be hoping for the best, but I mean, I can tell you, supply and demand and any economics that study this in the future are going to have a hell of a good time.
Thank you. Ted.
Ann just said something that triggered, and I'm gonna bounce off of that. And it's how we bring public into the buildings. And I think that if there's any kind of silver lining to the security measures that we've taken, it's to limit the amount of people that come into the school. And I think this will be a little bit more on steroids. I think it's going to be even that much more that we're gonna have to for the safety of the students, obviously, and the staff, to limit the amount of people that come into the building and where they come. And I think we've already taken that big step. I think we have another big step, but at least we've gotten it into direction. Can you imagine where we would have been not allowing people into school if we didn't have those security measures and security vestibules? So, Ann, thank you for that. I appreciate that little nugget. And I think that is important, that even more so, we'll have to limit that a little bit more.
Very good. Ann?
Well, two things. One, a quick plug. Superintendents, please listen to your facilities people. Not that we have all the answers, but we have a piece. And, we talk amongst ourselves. So we're hearing our best practices going on in places like Madawan and, other districts. So we're stealing ideas too, to try to bring them to the table. So, I encourage everybody to have that discussion. And then just on a softer note, just like every other incident that happens in a school, right? Whether it's bullying or something going on the internet or Twitter, our job with those students never ends at the end of the school day. So we're going to cut out our permits, we're going to cut out our activities, but we're a community when those children come in. We're a community with the teachers, with the staff, and with those students. So we need to be very respectful and mindful all day. And even when we leave, so even when I leave, not to go out partying at bars, to bring, other issues back to the school. This pandemic isn't over yet. And even though we are coming together, with our students and face to face, and we're so excited about that, we still have to be very mindful. Our activities after hours still have to maintain and be kind of tight, where we're not picking up other communities and bringing them into ours. So I think that's important, and we just need to reiterate to our parents as well. We got to stay close to home until we get through this and get that vaccine.
Thank you. George?
Sure. So I want to build upon what Ann said. We are all kind of in this together as a community, and that includes the professionals. And I want to just say that there's a lot of misinformation out there. I think Scott touched upon it earlier. There's a lot of people trying to sell things, and you're going to hear people making recommendations to do things like, well, we don't want to touch the doors, so we're going to prop our bathroom doors open. And you're not really allowed to prop corridor doors open because they're fire doors. And, we went through a lot of this with security. There were a lot of vendors selling things to wedge doors closed and all violated the fire codes or violated, some other building code. Call upon the professionals to help you. If something doesn't seem like it makes sense and you're not sure, I don't even know how many times a client called me and told me a story and said they got in trouble. And I said, I wish you would have called me first. We don't charge for that advice. I would never charge. So just, and bounce it off us. Just bounce it. It doesn't sound quite right. Just don't assume, because my fear, and I think we'll be getting calls like this, I think after schools reopen. Fire marshal came through, plumbing inspector came through, the health inspector came through, and we're going to hear about things that, recommendations that were made by vendors and people like that weren't so good. So call upon us, please. We're here to help.
Absolutely. Agree.
That's awesome.
Thank you,
I
George.
want to thank all of you. This was a fantastic conversation. As I said, we could talk for hours about this, but I really want to invite you back in the future, maybe after we get started and we get a kind of a feel for what's happening in the buildings. We can maybe have a follow-up conversation to talk about lessons learned and how we move forward. So thank you very much for being part of this important panel, sharing your expertise and helping the people that were on here watching learn a little more and take something back and share and listen to their facilities directors. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks
Have a
for the
great
invite.
Thank you.